Okay, so after the video I put out the other day, I had a couple people in the comments and messaged me asking if I could share a little bit more about how I identify conflict zones and entries. So I thought I would go through the trades I took today because today was a pretty good day for my edge and kind of just share my thought process. So and go through it. So the first thing I do is I go onto a higher time frame, which I use the 4,000 tick chart. I also looked at the daily, but there was really nothing on the daily of interest, so I'm going to jump straight into the 4K tick chart. Um, Price action going into today looked like this, include pre-market. And for me, I really only identified these. I identified the price was kind of in a bit of a range. We were in a downtrend, which we are still, but we're kind of coming into more of a just a ranging period. It's with FOMC later on this week. It's really probably going to stay like this until we have FOMC, and then maybe we'll break out that range, and maybe we'll continue lower. So, for me, the main things from a higher time frame perspective were really to see if we would get back up into this 14,460 area, or if we get down into this 14,150 area. So that was my higher time frame levels, and I'll just put them on here. So what did I say? 14,460. I should put 14,450. And the other one was down here. So now I've got my key conflict zones from the higher time frame. The next thing that I will do is I will look at the pre-market data. So if we get into today, I usually draw this little box. It deleted itself for me today. So I pretty much just pull out a box up to 930. Change the opacity down to this. Lock it in. And then little trick you can do, I put these down so that the values are super high and super low. Change this so it's ending at 930. And when it's locked, we now have this really nice pre-market shading area. So the next thing I do is I draw my next conflict areas, which I will use pre-market highs and also like key lows. So originally it would have been something like this, and then once we put this low of day probably here, and then I'm just really watching and waiting and seeing when we get price coming into these levels. I try not to take trades until we've interacted with one of them. So for me, I would have been really not touching anything, and then as we came into this conflict zone, I would have been watching. I didn't actually catch the open today. Being in the UK, I completely forgot that the clocks went back here and didn't in the States, so I actually didn't get onto my PC until a little bit later, but there wasn't anything that I'd have traded here anyway. But the way I would have looked at this is we came into a conflict zone, which was set by the pre-market highs, very similar to what we're taught support and resistance. Came into an area of resistance. This is our conflict, and once it pushed up here, I would have been looking for longs. We didn't get any clean enough pullbacks for me to take anything here, even if I was there, so that's fine. And we ended up coming into our next conflict zone, our next resistance zone. And my rule is that I will not take a trade in here. I won't try to take a breakout. I won't try to take a reversal, because it's my belief that at this point you have so many different traders coming in on both sides that you're so likely to have a fake out that the win percentage is just going to be lower. If you haven't seen the video I put out a few days ago on easy money trades, I definitely encourage you to check that out. Essentially, with a lot of people coming in here going, hey, I think this is going to break out and make new highs, and a lot of other people coming in saying, hey, this is a really good point where price is likely to turn because there was previous resistance here. And you're going to have some people who are long from down here going, hey, this is a really good point to sell, and other people saying, if we break this, we could then push higher. So for me, I don't trade these zones. I think that they are highly difficult to trade, so no trading in here. And what I do instead is I wait for a signal that, or I wait for an indication that one side has won. Now, I didn't take this trade in here, but for me, once we sold off and had this move, there is a potential. It's quite often with trading, especially like this, I would be I think looking back is sometimes difficult, but I would see here we came into our conflict zone. We began selling off. We held below the 50 EMA, which for me is confirmation. So this is like I see it's a case of, okay, a buyer's or seller's going to win. It looks like sellers are winning at this point here. Okay, it looks like we've rejected. Once we get that hold below the 50 EMA, I can say, yes, confirmation, we are holding below the 50 EMA. I want to be a seller. And then I'm looking for flags. Now this first flag is probably a little bit too aggressive. It's possible that I would take a short here, but when you get price action move this quickly, I tend to stay away. So this would have been the first potential flag that came back into moving average. I don't love that we kept on pushing up here. We just re-enter the conflict zone, which for me is a little bit of a red flag. The fact that we're coming back into that area where I was expecting there to see selling, it kind of comes more into the confirmation zone, which is something that I trade, and I did trade today. So I think if I had taken this and got in short, probably around 14,430, then I would have taken I'd have taken two positions. I'd taken half off into this low here, and then moved the rest to break even and gone for a 1 to 3, because confirmation trades I know work a little bit less often because they are closer to that conflict zone. But when they do work, they tend to have bigger moves because they're the first move that you have after. So there was a potential trade there. The first trade that I took, however, was down here. And my rule is that the first bounce off of a conflict zone is fine to trade, because what you quite often will find is it will come into you'll do something like this, as it comes into a conflict zone, and then it will have a bounce, and then we come back into it. And it's not really until we come back into it that that conflict zone is really starting. So for me, the first bounce is absolutely fine. So we can draw in this trend line. And you can see here, I nailed the entry on this. I took one contract. I got short. The way I get into my trades is I use a stop market order. Once I've seen this flag forming, I will put in a stop market order. In this instance, it was just below this candle here. Unfortunately, on this one, it started to go in my favor, and at this point, I decided that I would move my stop, and I moved my stop right to the point where we pull back to. It is what it is. It sucks. That's part of trading. So I got stopped out of this one just before it came into those lows. So a little bit unfortunate there. I had to take a loss. And now you can see we're in this conflict zone. And if you can see all of this price action here, yes, you can make money, but this is tough price action. And in hindsight, it might be easy to say, well, you could just short, this breakdown here for a scalp, but you would have also tried to potentially short this and taken a loss. And maybe you'd have gone, well, yeah, wait until it puts in the higher low and go for the long. And there's so many things you can look back in hindsight, but in the moment, it's just harder price action to read. The first trade I took off of this was once we put in this bounce, and this was a confirmation trade for me. A confirmation trade is simply there's a lower win percentage because the side that I believe has won. So in this instance, I believe the longs have won. It's really early on in that stage, and I'm essentially taking a trade off the point where I'm going. The first point I can say I believe the longs have won, and now I've got confirmation. So in this instance, we've got this conflict level, which was the low of day. Conflict, 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 conflict. At this point here, once we had this push, I'm going, okay, I believe the longs have won now. So now I'm looking for a confirmation, and that confirmation can either be a continuation to the upside, and I'm going, okay, I've got this continuation. I'm happy to be bullish, or a hold of the 50 EMA, or a hold of this level. And in this instance, we pull back and we held the level with a higher low perfectly. It's about as good as you can get. So again, I had my stop order in. I got in just as we above this candle here. I screwed up my exits on this. It was the first time I've taken one of these. I was also not feeling myself for a lot today, a little bit sickly, so I wasn't really feeling great to hold on to a position and deal with that. But I got in. I sold half of my position as we came into the resistance. I could have got a little bit more on this, and I took the rest out here. And this was a mistake. I should have given it way more, but oh well. We then pushed up into my next area of conflict, which is this old pre-market area. I leave these on. The reason I leave them on is I always want to be aware of where there could be resistance. And I think that for someone new trading this, it's imperative that you do so, because what you want to do is, if there is any potential doubt, is to not be trading. So I didn't take a trade in here. I think there was a potential long to be had in here, but it was close with the risk rewards. I don't particularly like it when my entry would say be here at 86 and I'd be risking, or 86.50, and I'd be risking, say, I don't know, 10 points or so, and you're only looking at potentially getting 8 points to the highs. I don't love those risk reward situations. So it wasn't an A plus trade, but there was potential. It comes back into our conflict zone. And then we got another confirmation trade, and this one I really did butcher if I'm being honest, but the idea was spot on. We can see again, we came into that conflict zone, buyers had control, and they came back into that level and began holding. This one I didn't love, and I feel that conflict trades or confirmation trades, sorry, work in the ballpark of 60% of the time. So I got in this one and it did push in my favor a couple of times and ended up taking the whole position off only for around about a 4.5 point gain, just because I was starting to feel like I'd potentially forced this one, that maybe it was a little bit early, that this conflict zone maybe, although it has been one in the past, maybe I should have been waiting for the low of day area. So I took it off. I would have actually got stopped out on that trade, so got a little bit fortunate, but I then didn't re-enter on the next completely legitimate signal here, because you can see one of my confirmation rules is when it begins holding the 50 EMA, and this is a perfect 50 EMA hold. The long would have been to get in probably around 64.25. The risk would have been down here around about 10.5 points. I'd have taken half off on this push here, and the rest would have easily hit my 1 to 3 final target. Next trade, so I adjusted this conflict zone, and I adjust conflict zones once it kind of becomes obvious that a new level is really formed. Maybe it's like something a little bit more defined. And we can see that this actually, this high here matches up with this high here. So these are always zones, right? They're never defined 100% levels, but I felt that the conflict zone was maybe very slightly higher than where I had it originally. And we can see we bounced into it and we pulled back. So I'm looking at this saying, okay, yes, we've hit our conflict zone, but we've only hit it once. We've had a very clean pullback. We've got a very nice flag. I entered on a stop market above this, and I'm just selling this into the conflict zone. It's very straightforward, very easy money. It's a scalp. I get in and I get out. Once we've hit it again, I'm not interested. We're in a conflict zone and I'm waiting. Now, this time, we can see we've rejected this area. So I'm saying, okay, sellers have rejected this area multiple times. I don't want to trade this area, but once it sells off and begins getting this strong trend like it did down here, I can be very confident in saying, yep, sellers have control. I don't need confirmation. We're nowhere near, well, we're kind of near, but we're not at our next conflict zone. So I'm looking for a likely move to the downside. Here's our next flag. Here's my entry, and here's my exit. And again, this exit isn't great. And this is the beautiful thing with this, is your exits don't have to be amazing. I got in this at 14,359.50, and I got out for like 9 points just under. And this happened in the space of about 25 seconds, I think it was, that I got in. I really should have been targeting an extra, maybe 3 or 4 points, maybe even more, given how big of a wash this was through the low. But it is what it is. This works such a high percentage of the time that you can afford to take slightly worse profits. You can take more like a 1-to-1 risk reward. Now, as you can see, we then got this next really nice flag. Why have we not taken this? This is picture perfect, right? We've got a beautiful flag. It's exactly the same as some of these. In fact, it's an even cleaner flag. For me, we're in a conflict zone. This whole area across here, which was the, this whole area here was a low of day. It's conflict. It's conflicts. We can see there's been so much indecision here. And what that means for me is this is a low percentage play. Yes, it may have worked this time, but that doesn't mean it's going to work 80% of the time. This might only work half the time, maybe even less than that. And I don't want to be in a situation where I'm trading that. So for me, when I'm in this zone, I'm not interested. And instead, we can wait. And again, I probably missed a trade in here because we were holding the 50 EMA. I know a friend of mine who did take this trade and nailed it. We can see here we're holding 50 EMA. You could have got long probably around here, around this sort of like 45-50 area, risking 10-15 points or so, and it did rip, which would have been really nice. We get the next move, and look, another beautiful flag. Why have I not taken it? We're in a conflict zone. Conflict zone is this area that has been tagged multiple times throughout the day. It was the close to the pre-market high, this high here, here, and here, and here, and I do not trade it. Why? Because it's too likely to see a chop, and even though this one would have probably worked out, we can see the price action is slow and choppy. I don't want that. I want to be in and out quickly. Now, I did then take a couple of, I would say, not amazing trades. We had this push here and we had a pullback. And at this point, I was in confirmation zone. So for me, I took two positions in here. I got in at 14,414 and a quarter. This was pretty unlucky because I had my stop right here originally at 14,404, and because we got this move in my favor, I got around about a 6 point move in my favor. I felt okay, I'm only looking for a couple more points, I'm gonna move my stop, and I moved my stop, got stopped out. If I hadn't moved my stop, and this is something I'm constantly looking at, do I want to change my stops here or not? If I hadn't moved my stop, I'd have never got taken out of this trade, and I'd have just been chilling, waiting, and it would have worked out. But I got stopped out, took a loss on it. The mistake I then made was I jumped in here without drawing this trend line, thinking we're probably going to break. And as you can see, we got in before flag breaks. This was a mistake trade. I took it out. I got stopped out right at the bottom. When I get bottom tick like this in a mistake trade, I kind of see it as a karma for taking a bad trade. So kind of nice to get that reality check of, hey, if you make a mistake, you deserve to get slapped by the market. I then waited for my legitimate setup, and again, confirmation trade. So I take two positions. One of them I got out as we pushed into these highs, which was fine, and the other, again, I got out too early. Wasn't feeling great for the whole day, so didn't want to be holding on to a position. Saw that it was up 20, 25 points, so took it off. It's a mistake, I know, but I know that this has edge in itself, getting out here, so taking the rest out here isn't horrible. And then the final trade that I took was my final easy money trade. And I do think I got a little bit lucky with this because there was some news around 3 p.m., which I didn't actually see on any of the sites that I use. But it was a perfect setup where we've now got a clear indication that buyers have control. We can see we've broken out of a conflict zone. We've held the 50 EMA once, twice, and we're pushing. So now it's very simply look for a flag and look for a long. Our next conflict zone isn't until that initial high of day area, and that key area we identified on the higher time frame, that 14,460 area. There's a bit of a high here, but this isn't really enough of a conflict zone for me. Maybe it would be, but even if it was, we only tagged it once. We have a very clear flag to the downside. Honestly, I think I could have got a very slightly better entry than what I did. I got in at 14,439. And my stop was like down here, so I almost got stopped out. We didn't, and on this rip here, and like I said, this was a bit of a news candle, so I got lucky with this trade. I got my target in here. The reason I believe that this strategy is so good, however, is that every single trade that I took would have worked out, and that tells me that they're on the right side. This first trade here got in, and it did end up working out quite comfortably. Got a little bit unlucky with this. Next trade I took, again, it worked very cleanly in my favor. Next trade I took, again, worked in my favor. Next trade I took, again, worked in my favor. And this is an indicator that where I'm taking these trades is when one side of the market has control. If you are trading in these conflict zones, you are guessing. You are hoping that the side that you pick is the side that wins and that they win right now. If you were to try to take a trade in this chop here and you take a winning trade, it is purely by chance that the side that you bet on were the stronger side in that moment. There's nothing more to it because the win percentage on the plays in here drops drastically. Even if you're going for a smaller risk reward, they drop down below 50% because of the major conflict there is. And you can see that throughout. Like every time we came into one of these areas, it began to be choppy. And you could say, well, you could use this as resistance. You could have done, but even if you had, there's still the chance you get stopped out. Use it here, you'd have got stopped out. Use it as support in here, you'd have got stopped out. So for me, identify the conflict areas simply as the support and resistance that we're all really good at doing because that's what we're taught to do. Identify support, identify resistance. Don't trade them. Wait for one side to clearly win. Wait for the breakout to actually be going. Wait for the point where most traders go, well, I've missed the move. And at that point, that's where the easy scalps are because there's nobody selling, right? If you get in here, I know this was a little bit fortunate with news, but when you get in here, nobody wants to be a seller until we get into this conflict zone again. No one wants to be trading it. Nobody wants to be selling. So yeah, they were my trades today. I hope it helps you to understand a little bit clearer the idea of conflict, the idea of where to get in, where you have confirmation. This strategy will work 70 to 80% of the time. There's a big margin for error in it. If you're getting good enough risk reward to see around about 1 to 1.2, um, this works 60% of the time. You're making profit, and on a strategy that can work 75% of the time, being able to only work, only to be, be in a situation where you could have it work 6 out of 10 times and be 15-20% off of the potential, I think is really important. So hope that helps. And yeah, I'll keep making videos like this if people find them useful. I'll see you in the next one.